old friends out there. So greetings to all of you and lots of people that I don't know. And I'm really pleased to see you here too. So I so appreciate the invitation that Jim extended to be part of the worship today. Today is a big day at First Unitarian Society in Madison, where a candidate to become co-senior minister is giving the sermon, and then there'll be a meeting after the service to decide if he will become their co-senior minister. And so I'm sending lots of love and energy to the congregation here in Madison today. So I'm going to get set up here. I've got a reading to start with, and this reading comes from the Worship Web, which is a UUA resource for worship. And this reading is from an anonymous source. The author self-identifies as African American, and the reading is entitled "Why Diversity?" Frequently, I am asked, why should the Unitarian Universalist Association spend money, time, and resources on racial and cultural diversity? I sometimes feel burdened with the expectation that I should have an answer because I am a psychologist by profession and because I happen to be African American. Often the person asking the question goes on to point out that not many African Americans would be interested in Unitarian Universalism, that African Americans and other minorities have a theology that is too different from UUism, or that we will never get a large number of them to come. Once someone even invited me to leave and go back to whatever church I came from if it was so bad in the UUA. The reason I want racial and cultural diversity in the UUA extends beyond issues of numbers, theology, or money. It has to do with the fact that this is the right thing to do. The religious challenge of our time moves us to open our doors to all and to promote wholeness in the midst of diversity. Many people seem to want racial and cultural diversity up to a point. I believe that true inclusivity removes that point. Learning how to develop, value, and appreciate cross-cultural relationship is to everyone's benefit. To embrace a world where there is racial and cultural diversity, Euro-Americans, Native Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans, people of all sexual orientations and all ages, people dealing with physical and emotional limitations, women and men must be willing to examine themselves and reach out to the community. When everyone comes to the table for discussion, there will be differences of opinion, yet we can ignore no one. All bring gifts to be shared, all can be honored and enriched. To build a racially and culturally diverse community is to build a world of beauty and power. It is the right thing to do. Being able to honestly and lovingly share gifts, pains, and appreciations with each other is what religion is truly about. A blessing awaits us all, and it will come when we experience the richness of racial and cultural diversity. I really like that reading, and it sets the table for us today. I am going to talk, as Jim mentioned, a little bit about widening the circle of concern, which is the report issued last year by Unitarian Universalist Association's Commission on Institutional Change. I hope a lot of you have had a chance to read it. It is an impressive and consequential report. At First Unitarian Society in Madison, the Board of Trustees, as well as a Racial Justice Learning Circle and staff, have dug into the report. I think it's a must read for every Unitarian Universalist in the United States. The report is a call to widen our circle beyond the vast majority of you in the United States who are white, middle, and upper class, and well-educated. Our faith is in danger of being forever a white ethnic church. Given demographic trends in the United States, this is not a promising path. I had a conversation a few months ago with a UU who argued that we need to own and just be who we are, mostly white, middle and upper class, highly educated. He talked admiringly of white ethnic churches in his Chicago neighborhood when he was a kid. Well, I asked him, how'd that turn out for those churches? Well, those churches closed as whites fled those neighborhoods. Being who we've always been is simply not a promising strategy. And even more to the point, a lack of diversity deprives our congregations of a potent source of vitality. We come together in our congregations to make sense out of life and to figure out our individual and collective parts in building a better, more just world. The central activity that is made exponentially richer and deeper when there is a wide breadth of experience, understanding, and backgrounds in the congregation. That's what the author of that reading was saying. Well, one of the really interesting things about widening the circle, and not something I necessarily would have expected, is it has front and center the assertion that we must dig into theology if we want to widen our circle. So let's take a moment to define theology in our UU context. And I think the Message for All Ages actually did that pretty well. But I define theology as our individual beliefs and understandings. So it's how we make sense of life, capital F, in our lives, and what we need to do to help build a better world. Our individual theologies remind us of what's most important. They point to what we give our hearts to. So please note, there is nothing about God in my definition of theology. Nothing. Yes, the linguistic root of the word pertains to God, but in our free and pluralistic UU faith, some of us believe in God and some of us don't. Others of us are not sure. And still others of us really don't care. It's not a relevant concept. I personally like talking about God as an it, which is why I like that hymn, It Sounds Along the Ages. That's sort of the transcendental idea about God. The point is, though, that we all have a theology, regardless of whether belief in God is part of it. So widening the circle asserts that our UU faith got out of whack in the 20th century with an exaggerated focus on individualism and a devaluing of community. This led us to privatize the work of theology. Each Unitarian Universalist has a responsibility in this view, if they want it, to come up with their own beliefs, and mostly they should just do this on their own. Developing our beliefs became an individual rather than a communal enterprise. Privatizing theological work deprives Unitarian Universalists of the company of others in our congregation as we fashion our individual beliefs. And I think this has been a big loss. I want to be part of a UU congregation because my spiritual quest is immeasurably enhanced by the questions, the wisdom, the experiences, and on occasion, the challenges of others. If I'm on my own figuring out what I believe, I have no accountability to anyone. I have no help in thinking through the impact of my beliefs and how I put my beliefs into action in words and deeds. Simply put, I believe we are better together. That's why, in addition to practicing my spirituality at home and in nature, I belong to a congregation. It's why I so strongly believe in creating opportunities in our congregations, like small group ministries and services where people share their beliefs, so we can explore together our spiritual journeys. It's why in Madison, or in pandemic mode, I started a pub theology group. Yeah, a virtual pub theology group. It may sound like a frivolous thing, but the purpose is anything but frivolous. It's an opportunity to share with each other in making sense of the world and developing our beliefs. One result of privatizing theology is that many Unitarian Universalists don't develop and deepen their beliefs and understandings. At best, they have a thin, superficial theology which blows away in the wind when life gets tough. Widening the circle also points out that when we don't have a theology, a deep theology to anchor our beliefs, We often then don't have the depth and the stamina to stick with the painfully slow work of justice. Most of us need a liberating theology to keep on keeping on with justice work. A lack of theology facilitates hopelessness and burnout in our justice work. So Widening the Circle recommends that we re-engage with our theological legacy. In order for our theology to become more liberating, Widening the Circle furthermore recommends that we also center the theological works of Blacks, Indigenous, and other people of color. And this last point is so important. Our UU sacred scriptures have come from a limited subset of humanity that looks like most of us in American UU congregations. So don't get me wrong, I love the old sacred UU scriptures like the works of Emerson and Channing and Theodore Parker. I love the new folks we've added to our sacred scripture canon in recent years like Mary Oliver. But still, it is a limited subset of humanity. For our faith to be vibrant and ever evolving, we need to engage with new and different perspectives. The writing and stories of Blacks, Indigenous people, and people of color is just a great place for us to focus. So I believe that creating our theology needs to be at the center of our mission as Unitarian Universalist congregations. This work is as important as the difference we try to make in the world beyond our walls. I need to be clear that even as I lament the privatization of belief in UU congregations, I'm not advocating a monolithic one-size-fits-all theology. Quite the contrary, my vision is that our UU congregations really have as many unique theological viewpoints as we have members. I believe our congregations should embody theological pluralism. And the key to having wide and deep theological pluralism in our congregations is to make space for others. Too often we welcome others, but then we really want them to act and believe like us. I cringe when I hear things like, well, we don't believe in God here, or we're really not religious here. In a truly pluralist UU congregation, there are people who believe in God and who don't. There are people who find it meaningful to describe themselves as religious and people who don't. Enforced oneness is an example of white supremacy culture. And it really does happen too often in our congregations. And it's part of why we look increasingly less and less like our rapidly diversifying country. So here's an interesting story. Rosemary Bray McNatt is the president of one of our UU theological seminaries, and she writes about a conversation that she had with Coretta Scott King. Coretta King told Dr. McNatt that she and her husband Martin had been tempted to join a Unitarian congregation as young adults, but they realized that they could never build a mass movement of Black people if they were Unitarian. McNatt asserts that becoming UU in the mid-20th century would have meant a fatal separation from the sources of Dr. King's power, a faith in a suffering God who stood with suffering people despite their mistakes and failures, and covenantal love between himself and oppressed African Americans. So McNatt then asks some questions that I think they really shake me. Do we really understand, she asks, that in pursuit of the goal of an anti-racist UU association, we are risking more than we realize? Do we realize that we are risking being informed by varieties of religious experience not entertained in our churches for decades, if ever? Are we prepared to accept that even among people of color at comfortable economic levels, as opposed to those poor uneducated people who don't know any better than to praise God, there may be not only a theological but a cultural understanding of the divine that travels with them into our sanctuaries? These are such good questions. Too many Blacks and too many people of color have come into our congregations and had the experience of members implicitly or explicitly saying to them, well, you're welcome to be part of this, to act and believe like I do. If you can't do that, then go find somewhere else to worship. That was the experience of the person who wrote the reading today. So friends, let's find ways to invite different kinds of folks into our houses of worship. And let's embrace the understanding that as we do so, these houses of worship we love are going to change. Let's do the hard and painful work of examining racism within ourselves and our congregations, so that our words and actions less frequently close doors to Black, Indigenous people, and other people of color who come to check us out. We have a unique opportunity as Unitarian Universalists to create houses of worship with an extraordinary wide variety of people and beliefs. And I think our country needs this. The world needs this. I think we need this. So let's get to work. So this leads perfectly into the musical reflection, which I want to say a few words about before we listen to it. What you're going to see and hear in a moment is a unique and powerful version of Spirit of Life, which is one of my favorite hymns. So the story behind this is it was filmed and included in the spring convocation at Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis. And that's where my office was for 4 years when I was at the Partner Church Council, and where I'm an adjunct faculty member. And among other things, I sung in the choir there. Eden is about 40% Black and is really truly a multicultural community. Well, there's 4 Unitarian Universalist students there currently, which is more than they've had probably ever. And for the first time, a UU student was selected to give the sermon at the closing worship of the spring convocation. And 3 guys in the choir offered to do Spirit of Life. Each of them comes from the Black church tradition, from Baptist churches, among others. And so they took the Spirit of Life hymn and recast it, reinterpreted in a way that's just amazing and unlike any version of Spirit of Life I've ever heard. And for me, this is a beautiful symbol of the gifts that can come when we are in more thoroughly multicultural communities. So I hope you enjoy this rendition of Spirit of Life.